Making a video. Yeah, real cigarette day. Just for the day. Whoops. I have to do a lot of things. Clean up this house, so I have a place to put a camera. Anyway, yeah, various subjects, just kind of a mixture of things. Anti-bullshit man left a comment on one of the last Thunderfoot video things, whatever. Then Matt made a video about myth, and that got me thinking, and something else, and somebody else said something, and well, anyway, I was just thinking about generally psychology, and just how distant our social memes are. I mean, even Pierrot's room was kind of just on this gamer stuff with a little bit of some mixture of the context of what does this represent as a definition of human culture. It's an expression of human culture, the fact that we play games that have a certain style to them, and that one could argue that I could argue that that's all arbitrary crap, that you don't need horse racing. It could be cockroach racing, it could be turtle racing, it could be a lot of things, and it just depends on what catches on, and that most of the human beings in a human society are just imitators. They're sheep. It's a sheeple is not an unfair characterization of the tendency of human beings. I guess in some sense I'm a sheeple in a lot of ways. What I wear, different things I do that are kind of prescribed by my immersion in a culture that says this is how we present ourselves, this is how we dress, and that style becomes something you gain a taste for. And a taste for something ends up pretty much just being an addiction to something. And we have a lot of addictions. So that's part of our it ends up getting immersed into our philosophy, and I do argue against that. And it does it though in other ways too, in these the more difficult questions of value, and in terms of judgment and what we respect as statements people can make about how good or bad something is and why they're making that statement. So it also bleeds into the circumcision subject to some extent too in here, and just this idea of, well, what are we basing the decision on, the negative perception or the positive perception? What are people deriving it out of? What evidence? And is there some way you can phrase, describe the reality where you can avoid falling into any kind of traps of this subjectivity or this cultural bias, this whole perceptual bias? I mean, in some respects, I keep trying in some respects to get us back to evolution, get people back to the understanding that you have to first understand that we're just bugs, intelligent bugs. But I mean, the biology is all bug. It's all in its core, it's just a feeding machine. It's a biological machine, and it's through intelligence that we become better organisms. Certainly some little bit through our socialization, in the sense that we raised our children. We had to become families, and through the creation of a family, you become a network of something. You're not just an individual anymore, and so that makes us look more generous. But we can see that we're so bigoted, that nepotism and racism owns the mentality of most human beings, and they really have a hard time seeing past it, being smarter than that, and you know, because it's part of your, you're stuck with it. You can't really get it out of your brain, out of your head. And so I suppose that I'll use that as an in to the more delicate subject of moral judgment and how we can express disapproval, how we can express or explain what is appropriate tolerance or acceptability, and that sort of comes out of some sense of the idea that you can't get past some of this. Some of this is going to be like your perception of your own mother or father. It's hard to see them in a rational perspective. You can only see them in this emotional perspective. And we sometimes do that in what we value and what, you know, and how much we value it, you know, out of proportion. You know, like the difference between your sister getting raped and some other woman getting raped. You know, there's a difference, and there shouldn't be, intelligently. But it's hard not to feel the difference. So, you know, how much of our rhetoric gets caught up in that sense of something, rather than, you know, a really explicit description of something. So I still want to defend, in a sense, absolutism. You know, that there are, say, a crime that goes beyond the pale. You know, where, yes, you wouldn't sentence them to eternal damnation, but in a sense, you can't see anything wrong with it, because the crime is so, it's so insane that you could just say, yeah, they should be hit with that stick forever. I mean, because that was just something that shouldn't happen. No machine should be that dumb. No machine can be that poorly programmed and still put food in its mouth when it's eating. You know, if something's smart enough to be able to scoop food off the plate and put it in their mouth, you know, not in their eye or not in their ear, and then they go out and rape, you know, beat up a woman, rape her, and then shit in her face, and then they're going to claim I'm too retarded. You know, no. You put food in your mouth. You found out that food goes in your mouth, okay, so if you can do that, if you're rational enough to figure that out, you're rational to figure out that that woman didn't have a good time and you had no right to give her a bad time. You know, you're not exercising revenge or something. And certainly you're not giving me any story that she's Satan. So what's your excuse? And it's like something that's just so dumb. So how can you be stupid enough to think that works? Or that that's okay? And I'm just making sort of the argument that there's no way you can be that dumb. So it's just got to be so overtly malicious. So overtly, you know, you didn't give... You know, you have to, you know, if you can't even understand the under concept of your entitlement to rights, and yet they're not entitled because it's convenient, and that's and that's it. That's the extent of your logic. It's good for me. I mean, it just doesn't. You have to be able to do better than that. If you can't do better than that, yeah, it's just impossible for me to imagine how you can be anything other than malicious. Stupid just doesn't explain it. You just can't be stupid enough not to get it. You can't tell me, you know, you can add 6 plus 6, but you can't add 2 plus 2. Come on. Bullshit. So anyway, this gets into, you know, this idea too that, you know, when we talk about anything bad happening in the world, we're thinking about it in the context of a vulnerability that it's going to happen again. We don't think about badness as being a one-time event. It's something that's a threat again and again, like a tornado or something. Any day now could show up, or a hurricane or whatever. It's not something that goes away forever and it's done with, and we never have to worry about that crime again. And so anytime we think about what to do about perpetrators, it's always in that context of thinking in terms of prevention, thinking about it in terms of never again, and the idea that, yeah, okay, well, if you beat the shit out of Hitler, then there won't be any more Hitlers, because the other Hitlers will see Hitler get beat up and they'll say, I don't want to be Hitler anymore. That kind of thing. And so that becomes the context for rhetoric, and so it's not very applicable to, you know, the reality of a circumstance. So I could argue that, let's say, so in this Thunderfoot thing, let's just say I believed, or that I had real evidence, or that we knew for certain because we had some sort of machine that could tell us the future, that Thunderfoot's rhetoric enabled, or you know, gave, was influential, was critical, important in making and facilitating a delusional asshole who who would have felt unempowered. It empowered somebody to commit a rape, a brutal rape, you know, where a woman's, okay, violated, beaten, and shit upon in some horribly humiliating and terrible way. Totally psychologically terrible thing in her head that she just can't get out of her head ever for the rest of her life. This image, these images are stuck in her memory. Very traumatic, let's just say. And it's such a, in a sense, a personal violation. I mean, there's no way to undo it. There's no way to compensate for it. You can't make something that makes it go away. And so if you could say that, you could say that if I perpetrate against Thunderfoot any amount of suffering that was anything short of, anything less than, doesn't have to be much less than, but anything less than what the woman would have gone through, I'd be justified in the sense that in net, because I saved the woman, the suffering, I have won the equation because I imposed less suffering in overall was experienced in the circumstance by imposing on Thunderfoot something less than that amount, and that would be justified. But it kind of doesn't solve the real problem, though. I mean, it doesn't really get to the root of it, which is there's a difference between somebody suffering because they deserve to, which would be the Thunderfoot circumstance. He's a threat. He deserves, or it's reasonable to prevent him. There's reason to stop him. But there was never a reason to impose the pain on the woman. She didn't commit any crime. She didn't do anything to deserve it. And so it's a different kind. So her suffering, in a sense, is somehow more meaningful in the sense that, yeah, it's not, the one is totally, didn't have to exist, and the other one has to exist for a good cause. And that's a big difference, too. So what I'm trying to get to is that, you know, in a system of deterrence, where you're trying to prevent, the same balance equation doesn't really exist, because you're now trying to prevent, you know, the actual creation of harm events, not trying to mitigate or trying to minimize. You're trying to prevent entirely. And in that sense, you might be able to justify a death penalty for jaywalking. Now, even though it wouldn't be proportional to the actual crime of jaywalking, it might be proportional in terms of it would create a deterrent effect that would be so substantial. You would prevent so many accidents and so many injuries that you could justify a couple of individuals getting more punishment than technically they deserve, so to speak. But again, the word deserve is associated with how unnecessary the initial creation of the negative circumstance is. So that went out. I want to fix that. So I have to go venture and get a lighter. So that's, I probably lost a few hundred of you, yeah, a few hundred, a few dozen of you, um, in making these distinctions. But I mean, I think there's room for that conversation about how, the context of, in what context values being measured, and the value of prevention, I would argue, is higher. Like, prevention is the most valuable thing. Cure would be the second most valuable thing. So like finding a cure for it. Preventing a disease is number one. Finding a treatment that always works is number two. And a band-aid, something that they survive it, so to speak, or something, is the third approach. Mitigating against the symptoms. Curing the disease and then preventing the disease. So they all have a different kind of, the different value isn't all, their value isn't all the same for those things. So I guess in the sense of, conversation about that, that's an element of it. Clearly there's a part of this, like I said, that has to do with your own ability to place somebody as a legitimate player, like something that legitimately their feelings must be considered. And and I guess there's a point where you almost turn the monster into such a monster that its feelings are no longer relevant because it's so dangerous. So it's like the AIDS virus or something. You could perceive that if you could manifest the AIDS virus into a human, that you could disregard its welfare just because the level of its menace is so high that any compromise of any gentility in your destruction of it wouldn't be very important. You'd be very unconcerned about how much the AIDS virus suffered in its termination, just because the level of threat it presents is so high. So again, back to the context of this conversation, I have to say that the intensity of my revulsion for acts of insensitivity is always increased as I perceive the person to be more intelligent. Okay, I mean, insensitivity in the stone cold, stupid, retarded fucker. You just say, okay, what do you expect from an asshole, an idiot? And, there's all kinds of those bubbas, walking the earth. But when intelligent people display insanely ignorant insensitivity, it just looks so much more dangerous. It seems so much more a threat. Because you're just saying, how can that virus survive in a brain that's smart? You're just saying it's just not possible for somebody to be, to do all this other stuff rationally, and then all of a sudden pretend like they don't know. It just doesn't. So again, I just don't. I'm not really trying to defend my excessive rhetoric. I still want. I'm still saying I'm an asshole. Okay, and sometimes I say things just because I'm emotional, and it's my emotions that are saying, are my lack of empathy. Again, it's hard to know whether you don't love something or whether you hate something. What is the thing that's allowing you to disregard it? A lack of love or excessive hate? And it's hard to say which one of those, because I'd almost say, like I said, for perpetrators, it's not like the hate is the strong thing. It's just that you just lose all capacity to have empathy. I mean, when somebody is overtly insensitive, you're like saying, why should I be sensitive to their feelings when they so disregard the feelings of other people? I mean, their entitlement to it disappears because it's so overtly stupid. I mean, you can't, again, like I said, if the person can function in all these other ways, they seem to be able to count their money. They don't pay too much for a Coke at the 7-Eleven. Well, how come they can do that? You know, but they can't figure out that, you know, most women won't be in a circumstance where they can prove they were raped. You know, I'm just saying, if somebody can't figure that out, that most rapes aren't going to happen in a circumstance where a woman's going to be able to prove she was raped after the fact. Yeah, it just doesn't take much thinking to figure that out. Just, you know, seconds, really, just seconds of imagination. And so that's, I'm just defending my rhetoric in the sense that that just seems so insanely stupid, so preposterously nonsensical, that you just can't find justification. You can't make it make sense, and so then you stop making sense in your response to it. It just seems like something you hit with a stick because it just doesn't deserve any other consideration. All right. So it's probably, you know, I don't know if I got into this exactly the way I wanted to, but, you know, that often happens with videos, so it's just going to go in the direction it goes in. So anyway, so maybe I'll read what Anti-Bullshit Man wrote, because it's just these words he plays with, you know, and it sort of relates to the discussion of free will, you know, what constitutes, again, whether or not we can find reason still to despise something in a world where we know it's just a program. I mean, it's a byproduct. But it's still, like I said, I don't know whether that really matters. If something's really broken, if it's a menace, if it's a blight, if it's an AIDS virus, you don't worry about why it's an AIDS virus, because it's a threat. So again, if these issues were all resolved, if there was never to be another rape and there was never another threat, and all we were arguing about is what to call all the past rapes, you know, well then that's, you know, who cares? There's nothing at stake. But what's at stake in these conversations is pretty substantial, and I guess that's where this gets into the argument about video games and the rest of these cultural memes. You know, that those things, that will have a real implication, and you can just pretend it doesn't matter, but it does matter, because you're developing a culture that is going to be immersed in this and addicted to this, and then you start having things like sport, where two men knock each other's teeth out for real. They do real physical damage. And you're just back to the gladiators. You're just back to feeding people to lions. Not much difference. I mean, we know that would be a very high-rated TV show. We know that would sell. No one has the, no one, you know, China hasn't produced that show yet. Maybe it will someday. But we know people will watch it. Because it's just too spectacular a risk-reward thing. To you know, so you got to see it. You know, but we know if we put a high enough bounty, if we gave people, it wouldn't have to be that much money, right? $50,000 prize. Yeah, there's plenty of guys who'd say, "I'll give it a shot. I got nothing to lose. I'm, you know." There's plenty of people who'd say, "What the fuck? I'll get my 15 minutes of fame. Yeah, I'll get killed, but so what?" You know, I feel lucky. We know there's plenty of people who'd say that and do it. So you could find plenty of people who will voluntarily, you know, get eaten by a lion. And that's what it'll come down to, right? Even though some will win now and then, of course, you know, whatever. But anyway, we know it'll be good people will watch it, and it doesn't have anything to do with anything besides the fact of that insectoid heritage. It won't be an example of how great human beings have become, or how smart we are, how it'll just be because we know we're bugs at heart, and that we have this incredible competitive nature, and this addiction to it, the drama of it. These are things we're addicted to. These are things we're emotionally dependent on. And these aren't things we necessarily have to feed in us. And so I can go back to like the vegetarian argument. This is an argument about how you're maturated, not what you're addicted to, what you're habitized to. And it's not an argument about how easy it is simply not to be raised, to be dependent on that, to find some other thing, some other way to gain your gratification. And it's not some substantial modification of psychology. It doesn't require any surgery. So that's where you start getting into this circumcision argument. It's another value equation about what's the best thing or the right thing to do, and what are the trade-offs, and how do you balance those, and which ones are important and which ones are irrelevant. So I don't know if I want to get into that now. Yeah, so I'll just finish up on that, on the cultural meme thing. So again, it's like these cultural values are just arbitrary. They're erroneous. They're not well sourced. They're just something out of our heritage, out of tradition, and all of that is completely avoidable. Like eating meat, it's just something you can avoid. It's like knowing how to play the piano, or this. It's just immersion. It's just being introduced to it properly, and then you'll do it. And it's like, how much of that is obligation, how much of it isn't, and what do you sacrifice to do that? So again, I could argue that I think people have an obligation, parents especially, would have an obligation to equip their child to be most capable as your intelligence is your greatest asset, and that's the thing. There's even if there's social value in the memes that exist in being a gladiator or being a sports hero, there's no intrinsic value in that, where you can find true intrinsic and fundamental value in having skills. I'm not too sure whether the arts, I'd like to be able to defend music and different things like that, but I certainly can defend things like science and acquiring knowledge and all that stuff, and all that is much more important for kids to be doing than kicking spheres back and forth. That's retarded. Retards can do that, but humans are capable of a lot more than run, spot, run, and that's apparently people just think they're going to raise their kid to be a dog. And yeah, they have a higher responsibility. Okay. I'll read some of the anti-bullshit man thing, and then we'll see where we go from there. So I don't need this part. To Inmendham's emphatic claim regarding that what Mason deserves. He actually prescribed in unambiguous terms that Mason be raped for eternity. No, what I explained was, I didn't prescribe it. Number one, I just stated that I think he should get what he deserves, and I pretty much think, yeah, if you're going to give him what he deserves, that's what he deserves. Okay, he just has no regard for what rape is. He has no sensitivity, obviously, and so yeah, it's something. Give him a big pile of it, because he apparently doesn't mind doing his part to make sure other people keep doing it, because he's basically giving them an applause, saying, yeah, good going, rape that bitch. He's not doing much short of that. Then he doubled down on his prescription in this very video. How would an whatever, negative experience on the eternality, negative experience on the part of Mason serve any purpose. But see, that's the point. See, serve any purpose in what context? If the context is that any violation, the violation against the woman who has not done anything to deserve any punishment, the protection of her sanctity, her right to be left alone, so to speak, I would almost argue is higher than his right to get what he technically, you could say, would be an equitable amount of suffering. He deserves, technically, so we're back to this argument. Yes, to prevent him from doing it, I'm not allowed to kill him. I'm only allowed to rape him, or do as much damage to him, something less than the amount of damage he's going to do to somebody else. But obviously, when you are preventing somebody from doing harm to some innocent, you do up the scale. You do say, I'm allowed to shoot him. Because the violation is perceived as being a measure. It's not just about the harm, it's about the violation that's required to commit the harm. It's about the obnoxiousness of the crime. Believing that people should get what they deserve doesn't follow from anything close to a utilitarian or prioritarian line of reasoning. Well, that I guess just kind of depends on what you do with this word deserve and how you define it. So I'm just saying that I don't know. Deserve sounds like kind of a good idea. Getting what you deserve sounds kind of okay. Sounds kind of utilitarian to me. Getting better than you deserve, I don't know. Getting worse than you deserve, those don't sound like good things. So getting what you deserve, I think, sounds kind of okay. Yeah. It follows from select versions of non-consequentialism, and it definitely follows from a just deserts theory of moral entitlement. Well, I don't know if just deserts is exactly the same as getting what you deserve, but yeah, okay. So, see, again, just deserts wouldn't mean anything if it's just revenge desert. You know what I'm saying? So, again, it's still got to be in the context of the value of prevention. And that's always the view we're going to have of this thing, is that somehow there is a connection between deterrence and punishment. Now, some idiots argue there isn't, which I think is just insane. But obviously they're arguing about, like, obviously punishment doesn't make criminals better people. That's a different subject. The fact that punishment doesn't rehabilitate criminals is not the subject of deterrence. Deterrence is about deterring other people, not the person you're punishing. Although it might work on them too. They might learn from the punishment. The punishment's real purpose is to scare the fuck out of the other people who are contemplating possibly committing the same act. And that's the real value of deterrence. It's not, so rehabilitation and deterrence are two different subjects. I'll point out to somebody made a comment on one of the other videos like that. And I was just like, oh man, you're too stupid. There's a big difference between rehabilitation and deterrence. One's fixing society, the other one's just worrying about these individuals. And I would argue that the individuals have already lost, we shouldn't even be investing in their life anymore. So we should just close down. We should shut that computer off. It doesn't matter who suffers, the enemy is suffering itself. Right, so now he's throwing this basic argument into what is this chain of social maturation. So, that you have to argue is, yes, but I mean, if you suffer 10 minutes today to prevent, 1,000,000 minutes of suffering in the future, it's a big difference. The suffering for 10 minutes now, if there's no gain, if it's just suffering for 10 minutes, well then it looks stupid, looks pointless. But if you understand that the suffering has a long-term value, well, that's a different context. So, yeah, suffering's always going. Suffering is the enemy, but that's like I said, the net game, the length of the entire game is what you have to measure it in, and that's where our brains, at different moments, we're not in those same context, and that's where it gets a little bit gnarly, because some of this you're arguing for something in terms of its overall effect, like having a death penalty for jaywalking. It may actually be the most rational approach to solving a problem, is to have draconian punishments, because overall you'll have a lot less pain created. This whole episode is doubly nonsensical when you add in the fact that Amindum is a hard determinist and incompatibilist for decades now, a moral desertarian who doesn't believe in free will. That's got to be a first. So again, well, that's only because you've mixed timelines, and I guess I would also argue that you think of free will based on it. The only part of the will that's important is the individual act, and you're taking it out of the context that nobody lives on an island, and that their individual, the truth and consequences of their reality is going to can have a much greater impact on many more other decades and centuries and millennia than just their existence. So it's not about whether or not this thing is broken. The question is it malignantly broken? Is the brokenness catching? Is it viral? Is it a menace in some greater way than its individual, tiny bit of individual influence? And so if you're talking about things that are going to influence hundreds of years of cultural maturation, things like Hitler, the big things like that, I think you're allowed to up the level of reaction, and all of a sudden running them over with steamrollers becomes perfectly rational. There's no excessive force in a circumstance where so much is on the line. And so the Glibites, who would minimize how tenuous and how easy this is for us to change. Culture can migrate in all kinds of directions, and it just takes a tiny nudge by a few right people, a few little nudges. So it's like an air hockey puck. I mean, our destiny is just floating on the little wisp of vapor, and tiny little influences, little blowjob here, little swat in the face there, little tiny mosquito bites of influence can be the difference. And so that's why there's a real stake in this, and people like Mason could actually be critically important to the outcomes that could involve hundreds of years of events. It's just a fact. Alright, and let's also understand that he wished eternal rape on Mason, not because he thinks Mason is a potential rapist, but because he finds Mason's videos and beliefs ethically offensive. So again, see, that's your characterization. No, it's not that they're ethically offensive. It's that they're threatening, that they're malignant, they're a cancer. Okay, it might as well be intellectual brain cancer. All right, because you're just saying if smart people are going to do this nihilist crap, this glib nihilist crap, and so that's where the Matt video came into this, because he's doing this silly thing. We need myth. The myth that we can live without myth. I mean, you're just like, no way, you cannot be stupid enough to think that he's basically saying we have to have a lie to live by. And you're just saying, what the fuck? What kind of rational, intelligent person defends bullshit? Living a fucking lie. And that's what he's saying. The truth isn't in our interest. Yeah. And that's what we'll see, but he's basically admitting it. He's basically admitting that the truth is we're bugs. And there's no way to construct this thing into a good game. And he just doesn't want to live with that fact. And so he'll fuck the truth to evade the truth. And that just sucks. I mean, it's just such a high crime against the value of intelligence. And that's what's wrong with what Thunderfoot's doing. It's so insensitive. And it's an insensitive that has to be built out of not just ignorant notions, but maliciously wrong notions. Yeah. True evasions of the truth. So anyway, Mendham's prescription would still be counterproductive. What's more, even if we pretend that Mason is a potential rapist, well again, I don't need to do that. But I'd probably say it depends on what you call rape again. I think he's perfectly comfortable with the idea of getting a woman drunker than she wants to be and taking full advantage of that. I think he calls that a successful conquest, and he doesn't consider that a fucking rapey exploitation. And Mendham's prescription would be counterproductive considering how apparently strict the preemptive punishment is. Abhorrently strict the preemptive punishment is. Counterproductive considering how abhorrently strict the preemptive punishment is. So you're saying that the punishment, which is going to be preventive, which is better than cure, so prevention is better than cure, and you're saying that you wouldn't pay a certain high price for that prevention, that immunity. And I'm saying, yeah, sure, it's worth it. He could have simply said, I lock him in a cell where where poses no threat. Well, again, yeah, I could have said, I just shoot him in the head because I have no inherent respect for the value of a human life anyway. And that's honestly true, right? So I just, yeah, I'd walk up behind him. He didn't know I was coming, just shoot him in the head. And yeah, there, he's dead. I wouldn't bother torturing him. I'd just eliminate him. Yeah. Okay, I could make that argument intellectually. But certainly it doesn't deal with the fact that it doesn't satisfy the emotional condition of saying, what's the deterrent value in that? There's not enough. But apparently he's too bloodthirsty to find that a satisfactory solution. Yeah, bloodthirsty is a tricky word. Again, I don't think it's anything about bloodthirsty in the sense that, I don't think bloodthirsty is the right word to use for somebody hypersensitive about the threat. So, if your sister was raped and then you see the rapist is still loose and he's going after your younger sister, is it bloodthirsty that you up the game? I don't know if that's a correct way to view it. So yeah, maybe I've seen too many lost or missed opportunities, seen too much waste, too many. I see the victims keep being piled on in many ways, and yeah, I'm just saying, no, whatever, nuke it. I'm saying it's unacceptable. This is too high a price. So there's a point where you just say, yeah, it's time to pull out whatever bomb there is, whatever the fuck this whole nonsensical mess bomb, and blow it up. In that sense. And so, yeah. But I mean, I guess in actuality, you would want it to be a bomb that kills everybody instantaneously. So again, if I could rephrase the argument and still be emotionally satisfying, I guess the way to rephrase it is that yes, he deserves to have a dick shoved through his head until dead or something. This is just another example of a long line of examples. Yeah, fuck you. Where Mendham should have just fessed up saying something dumb in the heat of the moment, given the... Well, see, again, I just don't think it's a dumb thing to say. I don't think you can really be dumb in defense of the virgin thing. You know, I don't think you can be dumb in the sense where you're saying this ground shouldn't even be treaded on in the first place. You know, the impositions are so, the rape of innocence, the rape of don't bother me with any of your fucking amusement park games. I don't want your radiation. I don't want your nuclear plant leaking into my yard kind of thing. That the right not to have your radiation leak into my yard. You know, there's a... So I just don't think dumb is the right answer. I don't think there's a dumb overreaction to this fundamental violation. But you'll never see him react as that requires retract, as that requires colossal narcissism, because as that requires not being a colossal narcissist. Well, he added it to point out that I didn't really retract it, but just scratch that last bit. The last video actually fesses up to it being excessive. Yeah, it's still, like I said, I just want to defend the word deserve, because it's not as bad a word. I mean, it's not a meaningless word. And the idea, you know, of deserving, in the sense once something is so fucking stupid, you know, of deserving just to have it beaten over your head forever, it just almost seems like, yeah, that's sort of right. Because there's no way you could have missed it. So it just had to be so grotesquely malicious. And it's such, like, it's like your insensitivity is so stupid that you just don't deserve anybody else's sensitivity. If you have so little respect for what other people are feeling, there's just no reason for anything to respect your feelings and to think your feelings are anything real, because you've discounted the ones you're exploiting. You know, the bad you're creating. So how can your bad mean something when you can't respect the bad you're creating? I mean, it's just that kind of thing. It's just, there's a point where, you know, I'm not saying that's logical in the context of a world that's going to end tomorrow at 8 o'clock. Okay, obviously it doesn't mean anything in a world where everything ends tomorrow at 8 o'clock. But it still means something in a world where you know it's going to keep going on and on and on and on. Yeah. All right. So let me... Sorry, I mean, these are more than one subject, and I don't know if that's... I mean, it all does this kind of blend together in some sensible way. But sorry. Some of you just aren't going to get what I'm saying. I mean, this is a nuanced argument. Alright, so here's him on the... So I guess this Matilda guy who just keeps bringing up circumcision. So I was thinking about some arguments with circumcision. Let's say it was the other way around. I mean, let's say you could sew skin onto a baby's dick. Okay, say we were born circumcised, and somebody said, hey, wait a minute, we need more nerve endings on our penis. And we need some microbes, so everything gets gooey and smelly. Because, you know, women have acquired a taste for cheese now. Cheese is very popular. And so, well, I don't know how to ever justify the fact that you're just going to create a bunch of, I mean, risks of spreading diseases, which we know it's a, the foreskin just creates a vehicle for, you know, catching stuff and, you know, moving it on to the next player. I mean, it's a spreading mechanism, and you know, and then once it spreads the viral infections, it just ends up spreading the risk of cancer, because viruses can cause certain cancers. So those two risks, you know, so there's no, well, anyway, let's just take the beneficial things that are speculated to exist. You know, the extra nerve endings somehow matter, and I don't know what any other advantage would be, frankly. So would you actually have the surgery performed on your child of having skin sewn on its dick? You know, because it's extra nerve endings. Yeah, you know. And but maybe we should just say, and let's just say there was a proven fact that it reduces, okay, if you put this extra skin on, it's extra nerve endings, and, you know, it gets rid of your risk of certain diseases, and 9 out of 10 honest women prefer it, let's say. You know, but anyway, all this would be kind of solved if they had some really good study. Kinsey studied this stuff. Look, and they really didn't find any difference that mattered. Okay, I mean, there's a little bit of a performance issue in the sense that circumcised men did a little better in terms of lasting longer with in bed and things like that. But I mean, nothing substantial, nothing outrageous. So it's really not an issue beyond this, you know, clean thing versus. I mean, the fact is, you're just, you know, they don't. There's certain bacteria they'll never find on a circumcised male penis, and they'll find it on almost every uncircumcised penis. It's just a fact. And they're not good guys. They're not good things. They're things that cause urinary tract infections in women and all kinds of stuff. So this, you know, it's just... All right. And the other argument, you know, again, I mean, the people just keep arguing that somehow our sexuality is... These sense organs are made to be active organs. Okay, so they sense the environmental circumstances, changes in the environment. They're not you know, most of them aren't sensual organs. And your sensuality is in your brain. So, I mean, you must have had dreams where you had extra arms, or you had two heads, or I don't know what else. See, I've had dreams where my penis has been all kinds of different things, you know, and somehow my brain is able to create a fully functional illusionary thing in my head, essentially, that matches the size that it has endowed me with. So it's quite obviously in my brain. Okay, it doesn't, how many nerve endings you have on your penis has nothing to do with your erogenous zones or what is stimulating to you. That's happening in your brain. And the amount of pixels just isn't important, except if you're going to detect the difference between, you know, a 1/2 inch pricker and a 3/4 inch pricker, and a, you know what I mean, if you're going to talk about minor detail, and that minor detail is irrelevant. A blade of grass, you know, versus a twig or something. I mean, these are nerve endings that are intended for you to feel a tick, you know, walking up your dick. They aren't there to have something to do with your, in any big way, your sexuality, except maybe in causing premature ejaculation, or ejaculation that might be more, you know, for animals where it doesn't matter as much, you know, how long you last, but it does, you know, it doesn't serve any modern purpose. So again, when this stuff's been studied, there's no performance issues, there's no, and so you're all talking like it's some sort of grand tragedy, and you have no personal experience. And you're just making this judgment because why? Because you are a certain way. You have a certain style, and you're saying any other style is wrong. And I'm looking at it and I'm saying, no, we're basically bugs. And it's a crude design. And if you can do something to augment it to make it work better, I'd certainly say go ahead. And you haven't made an argument that there's anything besides advantage here. And then, like I said, and then you tie this to some religious heritage, like God actually spoke to somebody and told him to do this, which is silly. No, men did this to men, and they did it because they found it preferable. That's all. There's no God. God never said anything about penis skin. This is a man's idea. It caught on because men found it to be, it worked for them. That's it. Anyway. So yeah, and this idea of, okay, so this is what I want to get to though. You know, it's just this because I've already argued this stuff, but it's sort of it's just this idea that there are some choices you have to make for your child. There is no such thing as preferentialism. All right, he might, but a first step in the right direction entails accepting preferentialism as an appropriate theory of the welfare for the human race. There's no such thing. Your preferences are a byproduct of that determinism thing. So it's a garbage in, garbage out. So there's no preference that's intrinsically respectable except those written by reason and logic. And obviously our sensual preferences and our emotional preferences and our, all of that shit is all going to be arbitrary nonsense and mush. What we get gratified by. It's all a heroin addiction of a sort. And it's idiotic talking about whether you prefer cocaine or heroin. It's silly to have arguments like that. All our preferences are bullshit. Because they all have to do with some sort of gratification of a insanely competitive, egocentric idiot. Psycho. We're psychopaths by native construction. We need to have pointless competition. It would be better if we could have actually purposeful competition, but the point is we tend, okay, to be non-creative, and we don't want to have to do any work to control anything. We don't want to do the work. We don't want to apply any discipline to do it right, so we do it wrong. And so instead of enjoying curing cancer, we enjoy single shooter games or some kind of bullshit like that. Instead of enjoying solving puzzles that have something to do with the mysteries of the universe, yeah, we figure out how to covertly send a picture of our dick to some chick's cell phone. Alright, since he never been receptive to preferentialism, yes, because it's just a silly word, preference, you're just saying drug addictionism, which gets back to Matt again, too, because he was talking about, what's his face? Oh, I don't know why I can't remember names anymore. But anyway, the atheist, non-free willist, moral landscape guy, who wrote a new book about how religion ain't so bad. But he wasn't really saying religion wasn't so bad. He was just talking about how humans need this emotional fairy tale to live by. Bullshit. But anyway, what do I want to say about that? Sam Harris. Am I connecting to this? Oh yeah, because this whole idea that you do some LSD and that'll just that's the secret of life is held in some stupid drug delusion. So we need myths and drugs, and that's the secret to purposeful and functional and meaningful life on Earth. Which just sounds to me like, why don't you just stick a Bozo the Clown dildo up your ass? Same thing. Alright, my guess is he'll never retract a thing on RIC, routine infant circumcision. Yeah. Well, I don't have anything to retract. So anyway, this is the part that was important. I don't know how I missed that. Appropriate theory on the welfare of the human race. So that the lopsided dissatisfaction rates. So he says he has some real facts somewhere about dissatisfaction rates of cut versus uncut males. Where do you have this? Where is there any fucking evidence of this dissatisfaction rate? I haven't seen it. You have some real study that they figured it out how to do that with some kind of real evidence? Fuck you. This is just bullshit. Uncut males give him cause to err on the side of caution prospectively. Err on the side of caution. Again, if I was going to err on the side of caution, I would say, well, which one has less bacteria and cancer? Those seem like pretty big cautionary things. Yeah. No, there's just no way. I mean, you just can't get around the statistical facts. I mean, the cheapest way to fight AIDS in Africa is circumcision. I mean, they found it to be the most effective, preventable thing they can do. And why? Because obviously, yes, there's just, it's a, what's the word you use when something is a vehicle for the transmission of a disease? I mean, it's a vector. It's just not a good thing. Foreskin is just it's disease enabling. It's all it is. It doesn't do anything else. Anyway. Yeah, so I don't know if I want to, it's just one of those subjects where what is all this energy coming from? I can't even say if I had a kid, I still am sitting here saying, I'm just not sure what I would do. I mean, it's not a big deal to leave it on. I'm saying, okay, it's really not. I can't see how it does any catastrophic damage. But again, as a circumcised male who has no complaints, how can I say, yeah, well, why wouldn't I give my kid the same no complaint system? I mean, why would I just assume somehow my father made a mistake in having me circumcised? Why would I assume that? Why would I assume just because it's natural it's somehow better? That would be stupid. So I'm just saying, if you just look at the raw evidence, I'm satisfied. I can't see how it possibly would be an enhancement to just add a little bit of extra gunk on the end of my penis. What the fuck good is that? I mean, how does it, what's the point of it? And again, it's not skin intended to be for your sexual gratification. It's there because humans don't have any, we're naked, for fuck's sake. That's why it's there. I mean, most of the animal kingdom, their penis totally retracts. I mean, it has to be so, but, well, I mean, humans are weird in that sense. I mean, the whole, most animals have a penile bone. They have actual boners, where the bone slides into their penis. So it is kind of, anyway, it's a subject that gets a little... Anyway, enough of that. But I suppose it's always good to... penis in the intelligent sandwich. Slips in there. Yeah, anyway, well, look, it's not all my fault because this guy just keeps bringing it up, so... But it is a subject where I just find all this energy from these advocates for us poor victims. I just don't buy it. I just don't buy that they just sat there one day and said, oh, the poor circumcised men. Oh. Based on what? Where, like I said, where are all these men who are complaining? And do we really think that the men who are complaining about something that has something to do with circumcision, or complaining because they just happen to have a shitty penis? I mean, how the fuck do you know? I just don't get it. Sorry. I just don't get this bullshit. So, you're doing it for our own good. Yeah, I'm sorry. I just don't buy it. And like I said, I'd like to see the test would be reversing the circumstance, as I don't think you'd be all that concerned about augmenting if you thought the augmentation was an improvement. Yeah. Anyway, till next time, and such.